Hello and welcome. You're watching The Mint. I'm Andy Hodges and this is ZTN Prime, broadcasting to you from our studios right here in Harare, Zimbabwe. Some may call the relationship between Zimbabwe and the United Kingdom special, with the United Kingdom, through its ambassador to Zimbabwe, recently pledging to strengthen relations and cooperation with Zimbabwe. It looks as if the sometimes fraught friendship between the two nations maybe, just maybe, be on the mend. New British Ambassador to Zimbabwe, Mr. Peter Vowles, expressed his country's readiness to scale up relations with Zimbabwe on all fronts. He said, and I quote, "My role is to strengthen relations with Zimbabwe." Today I ask, so is this a new dawn for Zim-British relations? What are the new British ambassador's views on Zimbabwe? Will the United Kingdom support Zimbabwe's readmission into the Commonwealth? What is the UK doing in Zimbabwe with regards to trade promotion, education, aid, and gender-based issues? For example, scholarships, United Kingdom, are they available? For part one of British-Zim relations, the way forward, I'll be discussing with my guest, Zimbabwe's new British ambassador, who's just arrived. He's only a few weeks old. Don't go away, The Mint. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome to The Mint. I'm Andy Hodges and this is ZTN Prime. Today on the show I'm joined by the British Ambassador to Zimbabwe, Pete Vowles, for part one of British-Zim relationship, the way forward. Pete, welcome to The Mint, sir.
Hi Andy, thank you. Thanks for having me on the show.
Now, even though I say you're on The Mint, you are, I don't know if I can call you Zimbabwean. I think in a way some part of you is Zimbabwean because this is not your first time to Zimbabwe. You were in Zimbabwe previously. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. No, I feel a little bit Zimbabwean in terms of my, I started my career here 30 years ago, in fact, and I lived in rural Mudzi, little near the growth point Suswe. There's a small secondary school there where I taught for a year, and then I subsequently moved to Marewa Growth Point. Lived in had an office in the district council, and worked all over Mashonalandese at the time. I also then went on to Bulawayo, where I spent a year there, and then finally in Harare. So over those years, I had a fantastic time in Zimbabwe. I learned a huge amount about myself. People were so kind, and I learned a lot from people. But particularly with that time in Suswe, living in a teacher's accommodation, sharing a house with 3 other teachers, no water, no power.
I have it on good authority, though, that you used to, at the weekends, visit some of the local spots, and also you used to have an affinity for Road Runner chicken. This is what I'm hearing.
Thanks, Andy. I really loved rural life. I mean, careful to be, as a British diplomat, to talk about it too, sort of from a position of privilege, but I really enjoyed the time I spent in rural Zimbabwe, particularly, as you say, going to the bottle store, learning to play slug with my colleagues, sort of socialising with colleagues. But particularly also, I learned to like Chibuku, which I think is probably an unusual thing for a British diplomat to say.
There you go.
But I actually spent a bit of time later working in Guruve. And just the whole social structure of sharing Chibuku with the elders, that whole
But in a way, I suppose it's nice that you'd have a representative of the British government who knows the country has lived here. I think that also gives you a little bit of a leg up, if I can call it that. So talking about that, I mean, looking at your past there as a teacher going back, 30 years ago, what's changed? Does it all look, from your perspective, now as a personal perspective, does it all look better? Does it look worse? What are you noticing sort of from a personal level?
It's really difficult as someone who's only been here for a month to answer that question, but what really has changed is my experience, because obviously I just talked about an experience where, we used to go down to Motoko to get our pay and queue for the whole day to get our pay, and then go back and we'd buy a goat and we'd save it for the whole month, and it would hang and I'd dry it on the coat hanger in the side of my room.
You're reminding me of me.
Exactly. So, that life then, right. Taking the buses, hitchhiking, being crammed into the back of an emergency taxi, to today, a British ambassador. I live in the northern suburbs in a beautiful ambassador's residence with a CD vehicle. So it's a very different experience. Yeah. But more seriously, I think what's changed. I mean, I was quite surprised arriving because I think when you read the news from outside Zimbabwe and then coming to Zimbabwe, I mean, I'm really shocked and impressed by the quality of the intercity roads. I know that is a national conversation, but the quality of the roads between the cities so far. What has also changed is quite different is, and actually this is the same around the world. In my hometown in Elgin in the north of Scotland, we've seen the urban centres changing as businesses of post-COVID particularly have moved out of the city where I live, but also you see that in Harare. You see that the shape of the city has changed. I always knew that Zimbabweans were very entrepreneurial, but you also see the kind of rise of the shift in the informal sector has been a big change in Zimbabwe too. So anyway, I'm looking forward to learning more the months and weeks to come.
Before I move into the crux of what we want to talk about, because now putting your diplomatic hat on, how about looking at my viewers and saying something in Shona? Good afternoon, good evening, hello, go on.
Makadi, Dinoedze Kutara Chishona. I have a really good teacher, so I'm learning at the moment.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a fantastic.
Well, there you go, well done. Right, now then. So now, Pete, you had an interesting time when you landed in Zimbabwe, because of course you landed pretty much straight after our national harmonized elections held in August. And in a way, I get this impression that it looks as if it's a new start, almost like a new beginning. You know, the elections are done, a new government's in place. It's like a new chapter in the relations between Zimbabwe and the UK. What are your views? Is it going to be that? Is it not?
Thanks, Andy. If I could step back a bit, I think you'd see that the UK is trying to change the way we work on the continent to an approach that is more respectful, that's more equal, that recognises individual country sovereignty much more firmly in our British foreign policy. And that's because it's rooted in, it's our difficult and painful history in parts of the continent, but also recognising the world has changed and we face different challenges today. We need to work in a different way than we've worked in the past. So at an Africa level, in Zimbabwe, certainly, you've seen over recent years that we have tried and we are trying to be more balanced, to be more respectful of sovereignty, to be more, to focus on those relationships. So for me, Pete, the new British ambassador, that means really investing in the relationships, having the relationships across the political divide so that we can have, proper conversations together about issues of mutual concern. It means remaining really neutral, and I think that's important. I'm a British civil servant. One of the key things is that we have to, we serve the government of the day, and the government may change in Britain, and we continue to serve and give advice to the new government that comes in. And that's really good training to be a diplomat in Zimbabwe, because we will work with the government. We are neutral. We don't have a preference. It's important to keep saying we have no preference, no. In the way we operate.
But
can I just say one more thing, Andy?
Please,
the other thing is that we really want to know the way we approach, and the way I approach my job in Zimbabwe, I don't ever want to be in a position where I'm looking like I'm telling Zimbabwe what to do. That's for Zimbabweans to do, not for me as a foreigner to do. Of course, in a relationship, in a partnership, there are going to be things that we want to do together, and both of us have to.
Look, you agree, you disagree.
We agree, we disagree, and that's okay. And a really good example, actually, is the arrears clearance process that the government has been leading with the support of President Adesina and President Chisano, and where the government has set out what it wants to achieve in terms of the reforms it wants to make. And the creditors, who own a lot of that debt, are saying, okay, great, well, let's work together. If you do these things on this, then we can help restructure the debt. It's a Zimbabwean-led process. We were here to help, but obviously it's a mutual strategy. So I think that's the key for me, is not ever sort of wagging my finger, telling Zimbabwe what to do, working in partnership.
I mean, I like that, because we're talking about the tone of a conversation, isn't it? And in a way, you can sit down, be polite, be respectful with each other, disagree with each other, but still work together and move forward and have good relations. No one can ever be perfect, so I think that's perfect. But I mean, looking at the tone of your first communications, I mean, I did quote you earlier when I opened the show. You put out a few statements on X, the old Twitter, of course. I'm still getting used to that, X. It feels like you seem to be reaching out to the government of Zimbabwe. This is what I'm getting from your comments there. And it's clear that there is an issue that needs to be fixed in the relationship. I think no one can deny that. And I think that's the first starting point. We know that, yes, there's an issue, let's fix it. So I suppose the question is, why did we get to this point? I mean, Britain and Zimbabwe have always been very close. In fact, if you say that you are colonizers, is that the right word for it? But so the relationship was very strong. In fact, you speak to anybody in the country, they go to the UK. Well, there's something fell off the rails somewhere along the line.
Yeah, you're right. We have such a long history, sometimes painful history, and it's sort of common knowledge that we reached a low point in our relations in the 2000s. And historians will point to that's sort of precipitated by the land redistribution and the ensuing political violence. And we really had, it was a really difficult time. It was really complicated. It got really emotional, both in Harare and in London. And I think we fell into the trap, perhaps, of shouting at each other a little bit and doing our diplomacy in public. And we lost trust in each other, I think, during those years. And as the president, when I handed my credentials a few weeks ago, as he said, we lost 20 years as two countries in terms of what happened, that relationship. So my job really is to build trust, to keep rebuilding trust. There'll be some people who still don't fully trust the UK. That's my job to continue to build it. And to be clear that diplomacy is about listening, it's about understanding, it's about dialogue. And that's really what we want to do as a UK government working in Zimbabwe, is to have those kind of conversations, to have that relationship. That means that we can have, as you say, sometimes difficult conversations, and that's okay. We expect to disagree at times, but we're doing it in a much more respectful way. Because ultimately, all that the UK wants is the best for Zimbabwe, and that's absolutely our policy, what we're trying to do. Everything we're doing, we can talk about in this and the next show.
Now, one issue that, from the Zimbabwe-Harare perspective, which I suppose may go a long way to building relationships or fixing relationships, is Zimbabwe's readmission to the Commonwealth. So I suppose, being blunt and direct, will the UK support that Zimbabwe's readmission into the Commonwealth? Is that something that you can do, or hope to push it going forward?
Well, I mean, the Commonwealth is I think the Commonwealth's a fantastic organisation. 56 countries that share common values, that have amazing people-to-people links, that have business links, scholarships, all sorts of great things. There's a real benefit to being part of the Commonwealth, I think. Zimbabwe played a really important role. Back in the 1990s, the Harare Declaration, this is a foundational document really for where the Commonwealth is today. So I can see the benefits, and I would really, I personally would really like Zimbabwe to be part of the Commonwealth. Of course, it isn't my decision, and it isn't a decision for the UK government. Sometimes this isn't always kind of fully understood.
Yeah, I think people don't understand.
We have
think the Commonwealth is a UK,
exactly,
don't they?
because of the history. Yeah. And the Commonwealth Secretariat is an independent secretariat. It happens to be based in London, which I think sometimes confuses that. But it represents the 56 countries. So my understanding of the next stage is the Commonwealth Team Centre had a team here end of last year. They had an observer report team here during the elections. And what we're all waiting for is the Secretary General. She will at some point, we expect, issue, because I think Zimbabwe applied in 2018. Yeah, then you issue she will then make a recommendation at some point, and then all 56 countries have to respond to that. And I think what we will do is, as the British government, will look at that recommendation on its merit at the time. Right. But I absolutely, if Zimbabwe, it would be fantastic if Zimbabwe could rejoin the Commonwealth, particularly obviously during the time that I'm here.
Now, you did mention the fact, of course, you just presented your credentials to the President, Dr. Idi Mnangagwa, and I noticed recently, it reported in the Herald, that you paid a courtesy call on ZANU-PF at the ZANU-PF headquarters, and I'm sure you'll be doing that to other political parties across the divide. As you said, you as a diplomat, as a British diplomat, you're neutral, you need to be looking at everything. So, first of all, my first question, I suppose, is how did you find him? Because it's interesting, a lot of people don't meet the President, they don't know him personally. I've met him a number of times. I mean, so what is your first impression? What did you think?
I mean, it was a lifetime privilege to be able to take a letter from King Charles, my head of state, and present it to the President, the head of state in Zimbabwe. And I could never have dreamed 30 years ago, living in Mudzi, that I would ever be in that situation, meeting a president, handing from one head of state to another. So first of all, it was a real privilege and an honour to do so. We had a good, there's lots of ceremony, and this is, quite inspiring and emotional to be part of. Right. But also, we had the chance to have a conversation, sort of 15, 20 minutes at the end. And we talked about the President talks about the royal family. Again, quite interesting, just a reminder of the strong bond between our country. The royals were here in the 1990s.
I mean, even our late president was a sir. He was knighted at some point. I know that created, but
the
still.
King was here the king was here at the point of independence. So really, that strong bond that is felt across much of the country. So that was good. But we also managed to talk about, as I've mentioned, that we talked about the sort of perhaps how we've wasted much of the last 20 years, and that we needed to turn a page, and the President's view that we needed to really encourage greater trade, greater partnerships across the kind of things we've been talking about and we'll talk about today. So it was it was good to have that conversation, and it was good to to remind ourselves that there's a lot more we can do. Some things we can do straight away, and some things will take a bit of time, but there's lots
low-hanging fruit, middle and long term.
Absolutely,
something we have to plan. Right, it's time for us to take a breather. After the break, I will continue my conversation with the new British ambassador to Zimbabwe, Mr. Peter Vowles. Of course, this is part one of our discussion, British-Zim relations, the way forward. Don't go away, the Mint. We'll be right back.
Pangolins carry parasites and diseases that, if we trap them, can risk our lives. Up to 200,000 a year are killed illegally for meat and scales. At this rate, it won't be long until they disappear into thin air. Please say no to illegal bushmeat. Keep them wild. Keep us safe.
My feature, Mrs. G.I.
The Queen is coming back. Can't wait to see you.
Me too. Try. Oh yeah, whatever you do, you call her Angel. Almost send me a little digital invite to this event. Okay.
Send me a picture right now to show me where you are.
I can't. It's hectic.
Send that picture right now.
Hey, Angel, you made it. It's true. It's so good to see you. Yo.
Welcome back. You're watching The Mint. This is Etienne Prime. I'm Andy Hodges. Today I have with me a special guest, the new British ambassador to Zimbabwe, Pete Vowles. And of course, he's a Shona-speaking British ambassador. I'm sorry, soon only people will be speaking to you in Shona, I'm telling you now.
Shoma.
Yeah, why not? Now then, you did say you did obviously present your credentials to the president, and as I said, you did just visit Obed in Mpofu at the ZANU-PF headquarters. But I assume that you're planning to obviously meet more people. I mean, both political, NGOs, whether it be civil society, whether it be business. What kind of plans have you got to sort of meet stakeholders, whether it be politically or from the private sector?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. No, I'm really being, my job is to be active and out and about. I think the president said today to Zimbabweans' own diplomats that, the diplomatic mission isn't a holiday camp, and certainly that's exactly the case in the British embassy. We are, I'm definitely part of the courtesy calls at this stage, making sure I get the full range of meeting leaders from all parties, from, as you say, from business, from civil society, across the country, really. But also really keen to get out and about. I was in Bulawayo last week, and Matabeleland North and Matabeleland South. I was in Midlands the week before. I hope to get to my team. I hope to get to at least 10 provinces in the first 6 months or so. So
great, yeah.
at least get out and make sure that I'm around the country. Top of my mind when I have these meetings is making sure that I am approaching them with respect, forming relationships that we're able to sort of build trust between us, but also talk about the things that work both ways. It's really important, I think, as a diplomat, to not pretend that we, the UK, have the answers. We have significant social challenges, policy challenges back in the UK, and what I really want everyone I speak to, making sure that I'm quite clear that I don't have an answer, that we have problems. We are here to talk about things together, talk about mutual challenges and what we can do together rather than ever appear that I am telling anyone what to do.
I mean, I think that's a great approach because, I mean, I of course went to school in the UK. I mean, this is why I have a voice like this or an accent like this. I was there for many, many years until my early 20s. And you're right. I mean, of course, I was there 80s, 90s when it was a little bit more dramatic than it is now. A lot of race problems that were there. But things that are there and are worldwide, things like high mortgage costs, the ability to get accommodation, employment, getting a job, and these are things that seem to be worldwide. And so in a way, it's appreciated to say that we can't tell you, Zimbabwe, what to do because, hey, you know what? Maybe we're suffering the same issues.
I've just come from the UK and life is really difficult. Cost of living, my mortgage was 0.7%, it's now 6%. That's quite a big difference. Yeah. And across the site, you know, our shopping baskets are really expensive. So the things are, as you say, it's important that we recognise the difficulties we face around the world. The UK has changed a lot since the 1980s. I grew up in the 70s, 80s too, probably a similar sort of generation.
Completely
changed. You know, I think, you know, you mentioned their race. I mean, I think when I grew up, you know, it was quite a white school I went to, not very diverse. Britain is much more diverse today, and you have to walk around the streets of London or Glasgow and you see that diversity kind of all around you. I think we still have some quite significant race challenges, as the Black Lives Matter movement showed, and just the kind of strength, you know, the challenges we face as a country. Interestingly, our opinion polls in Britain talk about, you know, the wide acceptance of a multi-ethnic society, but we see that not play out. We see there's a disadvantage in parts of the city in terms of
and
employment,
there's also immigration issues and so forth.
In terms of statistics, exactly. So I think, and we see social media amplify sort of racist views, etc. So, you know, there's some difficult things for our government to tackle and for our society to tackle.
I mean, one thing why this is important, of course, is because so many Zimbabweans are either living in the UK or going there. Even as we speak, I'm sure there's a couple catching a plane today to go to the UK for work. There's a lot of them going for care workers, nurses, doctors, lawyers. They're all going across to the UK. And I think it's almost as if there's this impression of the grass is greener. Sometimes it isn't. It's about you putting in the hard work and the effort to make it greener wherever you are. Just like anything, even diplomacy, I suppose, is exactly the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've moved country, I think this is my 7th or 8th time with my family. These are difficult decisions to make, and it's obviously not for me to tell Zimbabweans what to or not do. But obviously to think about it carefully, to think about what works for them and their families. But I do know is that Zimbabweans who do come to the UK make a really significant contribution, and we really value those who do. We also value, I think, in Zimbabwe, those who continue to make a contribution back to Zimbabwe. So in terms of helping families at home, school fees, charitable support. And I think what's really interesting, actually, Andy, is the sort of increasingly seeing numbers of Zimbabweans who've gone to Britain and are now coming back to Zimbabwe, and that's changing. That's a really great sort of contribution in the sense of the changing nature of bringing skills back into Zimbabwe. So something I think ultimately we can be proud of.
It was an interesting thought because you're right. I mean, I suppose when you're 19, 20, you know, getting on a plane and saying, let's go to the UK is a lot easier. But when you become a professional and you're having to leave your land, you're leaving your profession, I mean, in a way, you do want to come back. It's like anything. You want to go back home and you want to build your nation back up, or, you know, go back to your rural home or go back to your home that you have. It makes sense.
It definitely makes sense. It definitely makes sense. And I think, especially those who then come back out, having gained British citizenship while they were in the UK and come back, that's a changing face of British population in Zimbabwe ultimately as well. So it's kind of, but yes, I think if people want to come back and make a contribution to Zimbabwe, that's really great.
Just a quick one, and I'm not sure whether you'll be able to answer this one, but I know a lot of Zimbabweans are going across to the UK, and now and then there's always going to be on Apple that gets stuck there or gets conned, or you know how all these con artists that are going on, particularly in the Middle East was one area, and I think it's also happened in the UK. Does the British Embassy sort of help in those sort of things? Do you kind of oversight to make sure that the reputation of your country, I suppose, is not put in the doldrums because of some bad apples?
Yeah, something we'd be really worried about if we see that. And you hear these cases here and there, and I think, you know, it's concerning if that happens. And certainly, it encourages anyone who is thinking about employment in the UK to really do their own due diligence, to look at it, check out our social media pages, talk to us, because sometimes, you know, if there is a risk that people can get in the way and exploit people, that is a genuine risk. So, yeah, something we're concerned about.
Yeah, and, you know, I mean, I understand why people are going to the UK. Again, it's about economic issues, you know, going there, working, and as you said, sending money back to the relatives. That's what a lot of, in fact, even I have a few friends who have done that. Right, yeah. But at the same time, you know, as you said, it's about examining your goals, understanding what's there for you, how you're going to live. Because people forget that. I mean, one thing I must be honest, the one thing I do not like about the UK is the weather. It's too cold for me. I don't know. Maybe you grew up in Scotland, so you're okay.
Yeah, well, my kids have a motto that there's no such thing as bad weather, there's just bad gear, as in bad clothing. So weather's fine, you just got to have the right kind of kit. No, the weather in Britain is certainly a tough thing. I live in the north of Scotland, which is particularly cold, but lovely.
And also the Zimbabweans that go there, they work hard. It isn't as if they're going there and it's just a holiday, as you said, and just relaxing. They're actually going to put in a good shift work, and they really have to earn their money to send it back. It isn't easy.
It isn't easy, and I think if for those, for example, those who go and work in the NHS or the care sector, that is a really tough job, and we really value their contribution, but it is tough. I used to work at one stage. I worked in the National Health Service way back in my career as a hospital manager, but yeah, it's really tough. So credit to them for how hard they work and the contribution they make in the UK and back here.
Now, I just want to take you back very quickly. We've just got a few minutes before we finish part 1. And, of course, don't forget part 2 of this interview with the ambassador will air Friday at 2 p.m. Right here on The Mint. So please don't miss that. We'll be talking about trade, about aid and so forth. So don't miss that. But I just want to take you back a little bit about stakeholders. And one stakeholder that it appears to me a lot of diplomats miss is me and you, the citizens. People just talking to ordinary people, understanding what their views are, what their impressions of your country are. Because it's that impression that you need to change. Is that something on your plans to really try and understand people's impressions of the United Kingdom and what you can do in their minds to change that perception?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's quite hard sometimes as a British ambassador with all the sort of the kind of protocol that sometimes surrounds me, but certainly getting out and about. I'll talk about later maybe, I was out in Lupani district last week, meeting the chief and the village headman and hearing their views. And so, I mean, certainly we want to make sure we're exposing ourselves to people's views and everyday people's experiences. So certainly I desperately want to get back into Marewa and to Suswe. But I think also one of the things I'm quite keen to do is find ways to speak to people who wouldn't normally speak to the British Embassy.
Exactly.
So someone contacted me on Twitter the other day after I posted something saying, I've got this interesting thing about AI that I want to talk about. Well, great. Why don't we set up a coffee, come and talk to me? So that we're kind of we're trying to be open and listening rather than sort of stuck in an ivory castle somewhere.
Well, that's it for today's episode of The Mint. But as I said, join us for part 2 of British-Zim relations, the way forward. Of course, I'm talking to the new British ambassador to Zimbabwe, Pete Vowles, and that will be, of course, tomorrow, Friday, the 10th of November, 2020, right here on The Mint. I, of course, will see you tomorrow morning. You know what I do. Every morning, bright and early, 6 a.m., for the only show that you should wake up for, and that is Morning Rush. Ambassador, thank you. We, of course, will be continuing our discussion.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Andy Hodges. Goodbye, and please, you all be safe.